And good morning. I want to thank my guests who are here. Dr. Martin is here to watch this presentation, and Dr. Goody is here. And I want to say thank you for coming and listening to my presentation. My presentation is about the inclusion of students with disabilities in general ed classrooms. Some operational terms that we need to understand before we start looking at my presentation is, what is inclusion? Inclusion is students that have an identified disability are included in general ed classrooms with their typical developing peers. A self-contained classroom would be where students who have been identified and they're segregated and they get their education in a segregated classroom. The achievement gap is the difference between where a child is supposed to be at a certain time in their grade level versus where they are. Intellectual disabilities is basically talking about their IQ. They may have a low IQ that interferes in their ability to access information and retain information. Fidelity, we'll be talking about fidelity. It's very important that when teachers are teaching and instructing that they're doing that with fidelity, that they're doing it to the best of their ability. Special education students are pretty much that. They've been identified, they have an IEP, and they are allowed certain accommodations to help them gain access to the curriculum. General ed students are just that, typical developing peers in the classroom, and they don't necessarily need any accommodations. They're able to access the curriculum on their own. The STAR assessment is a progress monitoring assessment that my particular school system uses. It has an English or a reading section, and it has a math section, and then the WJIB, which is the Woodcock-Johnson for tests for achievement. I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of inclusion and go over just a few points about my literature review that I was able to do. A lot of things that I read talked about how inclusion came about from the Brown versus Brown of Education Act of 1954. And that act basically was more, it was more about the segregation of black children and white children. And so that kind of opened up the door about segregating able children and non-able children. Okay, and then in 1975, EHA, or the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act, it came about to, it was the act that provided funds to schools that were going to be educating students with disabilities. And then IDEA came about originally in 1997, and it helped with the rights and protected children that had disabilities in school. And then President Bush introduced No Child Left Behind in 2001, and it also it guided the federal funds and the state funds and how special education programs were going to be utilized in schools. And then in 2004, there was a reauthorization of IDEA, and it basically changed how things were going to be reported on the federal level and the state level. There are several things that I was very interested in, and so my research hypothesis is, students with disabilities that are fully included with support in general education classrooms are more likely to close the educational or achievement gap than students who receive the same instruction in a self-contained classroom as measured by the Woodcock-Johnson test of achievement. My null hypothesis is students with disabilities that are fully included in general education classrooms or instructed in a self-contained classroom are equally likely to close the achievement gap. And so my research question really deals with, does the full inclusion of students in a general education classroom really help close that educational gap and is it a better option for students with disabilities? So my methodology begins with the fact that I'm going to be doing a comparative study. I will have an experimental group and a control group. I will be gathering quantitative data using the norm reference test, which is the Woodcock-Johnson. And the setting will be, I will have an experimental group that is the inclusion group, where the students with disabilities who have an identified disability will be included in a generated classroom with their typical developing peers. And then my self-contained classroom is going to be considered the control group. And then we will have fidelity checks throughout the process, and that there will be observations, making sure that the instruction is as equal as can be, and that both students have the same opportunity and access to the curriculum. The selection process is random. The children will be between the ages of 7 and 8 years old and have been diagnosed as having an intellectual disability and have an IQ between 40 and 75. And many people ask, well, if they have been identified having a low IQ, how are you going to find the difference? Well, there are children in generated classrooms that do have low IQs, but they're still able to access the curriculum and make progress. Some children that have low IQs are not able to access the curriculum, and therefore they have an IEP and they have the accommodations to help them access the curriculum. So my procedures will include getting consent from the parents so their child can be a part of the group. I will give a pre-test using the Woodcock-Johnson test of achievement, and then throughout the school year, I will be progress monitoring bi-weekly their using star reading and star math, and probably bi-weekly do the fidelity checks with the observations, just to make sure that the teachers are still providing the same quality instruction. And I will give a post-test using the same test that I use in the pre-test, the Woodcock-Johnson test of achievement. Okay, so this really ends up being a quasi-experimental study because I'm comparing two groups to a baseline, and I will be using the ANOVA, that is how I will be determining the significant difference between the two groups, and then I will report that with the t-test, and the t-tests are used to show the difference between the two groups. And then I will take that data and input it into a statistical software, which is SPSS, and it will give me a report to tell me where the significance difference is. And finally, it will give me a p-value, which will show the extreme of the differences between the two. This is just an example of a table that I might use in the study that will show the difference, and it will tell you the variable, the reading, mathematics, the included versus self-contained group, and it will give us the means and the standard deviation of the pre-test and post-test. And then at the end of my study, we'll review the findings and see which group was getting better at closing the gap. And I'll discuss also the limitations of my study, because not every study is perfect. So there's always limitations to my study. I'll be finding those out as I go. And then, as throughout the study, I will be given the opportunity to look at additional questions. As I do my study, there will be opportunities for things to come up that just didn't make sense, so I may have other questions that I need to address. And then I have my references. And finally, this is how you can reach me. I am a doctoral student with the Carson Newman, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to take those now. Thank you.